Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about clinical evaluations. I haven't talked about clinical evaluations in a long time. Clinical evaluation reports are specific to the European market. So if you're CE marking a medical device, this is something you have to do. Not something you only have to do if you have a high-risk device. You have to do clinical evaluations. So even if you have a class 1 device that is non-measuring, non-reprocessed, non-sterile, you still have to do the clinical evaluations. The difference is you don't have a notified body looking over your shoulder reviewing that clinical evaluation. And so if you have to do a clinical evaluation, how do you do it? And under the MDR, how are you supposed to be doing that? Do you need to update your old procedure that you had? Or if you purchased or borrowed a copy of procedure from a company that was compliant with the MDD, what do you have to do now under the MDR? So periodically, companies are like, okay, we got to catch up here. We got to get this procedure up to date. Where should you start? So number one, Article 60, now I'm forgetting which number is 61 or 62. My apologies. I will double check right now. So we will just type in Article 61 here and see if I was right. Sorry about that. Yes, Article 61 is the article that you would go to in the main body of the MDR. The other place, the more important place, is Annex 14, XIV 14. There's a Part A and there's a Part B. Part B you've probably looked at a lot of times because it has post-market clinical follow-up in Part B. But Part A is the clinical evaluation. So between Article 61 and Annex 14 Part A, that's where the requirements are for a clinical evaluation. But you're not done. So when you write this procedure, you're going to have to make sure it complies with that article, that annex, but you also have to make sure that you include the MDCG guidance documents. So MDCG, for those that have forgotten, that acronym is Medical Device Coordinating Group. So MDCG. The different member states contribute members to the MDCG, and these technical experts are reviewing the documentation that's required for different devices and saying, okay, let's give them some more guidance as to what we want in terms of format and content and how they're supposed to do the review of these when it's a notified body, and also what the company should be doing when they create these documents for the technical documentation in your technical file. So the requirement for including what should be in your technical file, that's found in Annex II. So they used to not even have a detailed requirement of what should be in your technical file. But now that one of the big changes that they made in the MDR was to add, these are the requirements that have to be in your technical file. So that was Annex II. Then at the very end of the process, they said, oh, we're going to add a new section, Annex III, that's going to be specific to post-market surveillance requirements. And then the last one, the Annex IV, that's the Declaration of Conformity. But in Annex II, that's where it's saying you have to have a clinical evaluation, and that should be included in your technical documentation or technical file. And then go to Annex 14, Part A, to figure out how you're supposed to write that, and then Article 61. When you go to the MDCG guidance documents, there's three of them that are relevant here. So the first one of them, and I provided a hyperlink down below to these guidance documents. I don't think you'll have any trouble finding the MDR because you probably have downloaded it multiple times. Otherwise, you wouldn't be CE marking. But the MDCG guidance documents, it's helpful to have this link. I put it down below, and it takes you to the page, and you scroll down, and it's organized by sections. So the section you want to get to, I think it's the third section on the page. So first section in it, it's MDCG work in progress. So that only has one hyperlink. Then we have Annex 16 products. We have borderline in classification, then class 1. So it even has some guidance on class 1 devices. And then we get to clinical investigation and evaluation. So the difference, clinical investigation is an actual clinical study, clinical evaluation is the assessment of that data as well as literature search in other equivalent devices. So when you go down through the clinical investigation evaluation section, the first few items, the first half of the list is investigations, and then you get to MDCG 2020-13. That's the Clinical Evaluation Assessment Report template. Now, this is not a clinical evaluation report template. It's a clinical evaluation assessment report template. So you have to be careful that you read carefully here. That particular document, right at the beginning of it, it says it's for the notified body, not for you. What you're supposed to do is write your document so it's organized the way that report is to make it easier for the notified body to find what they're looking for when they write their report. So you go through that evaluation assessment report template and say, okay, these are the different things they need in the order that they need them, just like you were doing any kind of a document like a technical file or 510K or any submission. And you say, we got to have each of these requirements. They're going to be looking for it. And it tells you what they look at and what they look for. So you got to make sure you have those things in your clinical evaluation. So that is not for you to fill in. That's for you to use as a guidance to create your clinical evaluation. But that is what they will fill in. Now, if you are a company that has a class 1 device that the notified bodies will not be reviewing, they won't be looking over your shoulder. They won't be following that assessment report template. So you could deviate from that for a class 1 product. However, it's probably not such a good idea in case your device is reviewed at some point by a notified body at a later date because it gets up-classified or you change the indication for use. And you want to be consistent throughout your processes if you have a mixture of different classifications of products. But technically, the notified bodies won't be looking at them, so you are required to have one, but you're not required to have it assessed according to that template because it's a class 1 product. That being said, it's still a good idea. And keep in mind, we have other people, economic operators, are going to be looking at this as well. Because even though you're a class 1 product, you still have an importer that you have to put their sticker on your product, indicating that this meets the requirements for the CE marking. You also have your distributors are going to be in that category, and you also have your authorized representatives if you're outside the EU. So multiple people are going to be looking at this, not just the notified bodies, and so therefore they're going to be expecting that as well, even though you're a class 1 device. What they're going to be used to is these requirements for the other higher risk devices. So don't deviate significantly and try to get away with something that doesn't really meet the requirements. There are different kinds of things that you should also be looking for. There's 2 more guidance documents on this page. One is MDCG 2020-6. That's specific to the clinical evaluation of legacy devices. And then the last one on the list is 2020-5, which is clinical evaluation using equivalence. So equivalence, they're very specific about how they define equivalence. What the FDA calls equivalence is not what the Europeans call equivalence. So the FDA, they're looking for something that has the same intended use, not the same indications. What the FDA wants is something that, if it has different technological characteristics, you've addressed that with verification and validation testing. Not so with the Europeans. They want the same technological characteristics. So what is the material made out of? What is the shelf life of the device? Does it have power? Does it have software? Is the interface the same? These are the things that they're going to expect for equivalence of a medical device in Europe, and not so for the FDA. So when you read that equivalence document, you'll see to have equivalence, it needs to be almost identical in terms of form, fit, and function, if you like those terms. But the Europeans think more in terms of the essential requirements have to be the same for this device. If you have differences in essential requirements, that's going to be very difficult to demonstrate equivalence for this device. If you have a legacy device, so you have a product that's been CE marked for a while and it's been under the MDD, That's when you need that clinical evidence for legacy devices that were always on the market. And then the first one I said is for the assessment report. So where do we find a guidance document that tells me how to do this? The only real guidance document that you have is the MedDev document, which is no longer really valid because that's under the MDD, but the MedDev 2-2.7.1 Rev 4 is still the method that we use for clinical evaluations. However, the whole point of creating the MDR was to put the detail of how to do things in the actual regulation. So you should be able to go right to Article 61 and Annex 14 and get the information you need there on how this is supposed to be performed. It doesn't have that level of detail, unfortunately, and neither do the MDCG guidance documents. So what do? The only thing you have left to do is go back to MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 4. So if you already have a clinical evaluation procedure and it was written to 2.7.1 Rev 4, you're probably in good shape, but you're not up to date. So you should update that to make sure you have all these references. You want to have a reference to Article 61. You want to have a reference to Article Annex 14. You want to have a reference to each of those three guidance documents from the MDCG, and you want to indicate what your new template will be. So you should have a form or a template that guides you on what should be in your clinical evaluation report. Now, what hasn't changed is it can still be based on literature searches combined with either equivalence from predicate devices, not predicate, equivalent devices, or it can be including clinical investigation data that you've gathered on your product. Alternatively, you could be basing it on just clinical investigation data if you've done a clinical investigation for your device. But going forward, when you're doing updates to your clinical evaluation, you're going to have to still do literature searches to look at what other companies have done, what similar devices are out there in the market, what some people like an investigator-led rather than a company-led investigation might exist out there on your product, so you should be aware of those. You're also going to be gathering, excuse me, you're also going to be gathering post-market surveillance data. So you're going to be doing not just customer satisfaction surveys, post-market surveillance. So you're going to be gathering, if you have an electronic device, you should be looking for bug reports on any software, cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Every device out there has usability issues. So are there any things that are, any use errors that you're familiar with, anything that's difficult to perform with this device, any difficulties, any interoperability issues with other devices that you're aware of? Those would be some of the things you'd be looking for. So make sure that you're asking those questions about cybersecurity, software bugs, and for usability. Those should be table stakes. If you have an implant device, they're looking for longevity of the device, explant data. There might be a registry out there. You want to look at data from other countries. So there's a lot of post-market data you're going to be collecting. Don't forget complaints. You're going to be including the complaint data, any regulatory reporting data from Europe as well as other countries. So all that information goes into your clinical evaluation, not just the original clinical data, not just the literature search. I mean, yes, you have to do a literature search, but that's not the core of what your clinical evaluation is supposed to be about. You're going to have to be linking this with your risk analysis. So you have to have a risk management file. You have to be identifying how you're going to assess what your clinical benefits are of your device. And there's one other little requirement. If you pay attention, you go to Annex 14, they also require in there that you have a clinical evaluation plan. So whatever your plan is for how you're going to gather this clinical data, that has to be in there as well. And there's even a requirement in there for a clinical development plan. So how are you going to gather clinical data on your product? Are you going to do a first in human study, and then you're going to do an early feasibility study, or vice versa? Are you going to be doing a, let's say, pivotal study? Are you going to be doing it in one country and then launching it in other countries? Are you going to be doing a multi-center study? That strategy, that plan for how you're going to be conducting your clinical investigations and gathering data is something that they want in that clinical evaluation as well. So there's a lot more information that you need to include in your new procedure, and make sure you've covered all those items in your updated procedure, and you're following that, and you have a template that covers all those things. I hope that helps everybody. This month, the month of January, we're making our clinical evaluation procedure available at a discounted price. So you use that Alicia code. And also, I'm going to be updating that procedure. So that should be available fairly soon. Probably another 2 weeks. I'll have it ready to launch, and Alicia will send out an email for people that have already bought it and downloaded. Hey, there's a new version to download. But there'll be a lot of information there, and I put a lot of detailed information down below in the description. I summarized things, didn't do copy and paste, but there's a lot of summary of what are the requirements and where can you find things, and in that hyperlink to the MDCG guidance documents for you to download. I hope that helps everybody, and you have a great week. Don't forget to put comments down below. Any questions you might have, I'd be happy to answer them, and I got a whole ton of questions last week. So please take a look at our website and make any comments that you have related to the videos that we've already done, or this new video, or suggestions for future videos. I'm always looking for your comments, and I try to respond to those every week after our most recent live sessions. See you next week, and have a great day. Bye-bye.